welcome to our channel. We're known as the couple that has been living the FIRE lifestyle for over 3 decades. Most of it in the States and some of it abroad. And so welcome to FIRE earlier and better at home or abroad. In this video, we're going to talk about, is this going to be the Great Depression again? Stay to the end of the video. I'll give you 7 ways to make yourself depression proof. So when we talk about these kinds of subjects, like depressions and such, there's quite a bit of history on depressions, and the biggest one was, of course, the one that most people know about is 1929. Now there were other crashes before that, but this 1929 crash was, deeper, bigger, lasted a lot longer. It lasted 10 years. It was global. A lot of other countries also suffered, some of them worse than the United States. But as far as the biggest one, the 1929, we're talking about this because a lot of the things that are going on right now, this year, 2020, are starting to shape up like they were in the Great Depression of 1929. And one of them is the unemployment rates. Throughout the history of the United States and a lot of other countries, the unemployment rates were the highest that we've seen in all of the recessions, depressions, in the United States. But we're seeing numbers coming out as this situation with the health scare and stay-at-home orders, that lots of people being unemployed, those numbers are starting to creep up into the level of a Great Depression, which were back then in 1929 around 23 to 25%. That's why we're saying, is this going to be another Great Depression because of those numbers? And the thing about that depression is that a lot of times people say that the Great Depression caused the stock market crash, but actually the stock market crashed and then the Great Recession played out. So other things happened after the stock market crash, and they all seemed to kind of balloon and just kind of do a domino effect, which is something that is a concern with today in 2020, that domino effect. And there was one of the greatest bull markets in the history of the United States was in the 1920s. And back then there was brokerage accounts only had a 10% margin, which means that people could put $10,000 in their brokerage account, and the broker would lend them 90%, and they would only have to put up 10%. So theoretically they could, or actually practically they could buy, with $10,000, they could buy $100,000 worth of stock, or with $100,000 they could buy $1 million worth of stock. The problem with that is, the problem with leverage as it was then and it is now, nothing has changed, is that it works great when everything goes in your favor, but when it doesn't, you're going to have to pay the broker the money that you owe them going along buying $100,000 worth of stock. If that stock loses 50%, you owe the broker $50,000 and you only put up 10. So you need to make up the rest, $40,000. And of course, the domino effect is that people got laid off and didn't have the money. And because of the big bull market, there was a great fervor on speculation. It has to be stated that lots of the everyday folks were starting to speculate in the stock market. As you see today, you see a lot of buzz today. We have an acronym for it called FIRE. So there's a lot of buzz, a lot of books, a lot of people, a lot of blogs talking about FIRE, and a lot of it is based on stock market investment, and especially index fund stock market investment, which means that they're just blindly kind of buying the index. And I'm not faulting it. I'm just saying that that's what's being done. That's what's happening. And therefore it's really easy. Anybody can do it. There's no real, research or study like if you were investing in individual stocks. And so anybody can do it. So everybody starts doing it because it's much easier in this internet information age for people to learn about other people that are being successful with this technique. So the information spreads quickly. And during a huge bull market, everybody's making money. So I'm just saying that's what was happening in the 20s. Okay? And of course, what goes up must come down, and anything that goes up super high usually crashes more strongly. There are other ways that people reach fire through, they do different kinds of businesses. Real estate is a business. In a recession, though, real estate also takes a big hit. If there's a large amounts of people not working, they can't pay the rent. A lot of people in the Depression era, families were just piling up all together in one house in order to, for survival. And so the lower end housing stays rented, but every other house, rents have to come down or they stay vacant. A lot of issues like that, lots of small businesses going broke. Stories of people that perceive themselves as being benevolent to their fellow man, such as, small mom and pop grocers extending credit to, John and Mary neighbors for groceries. And then when this Great Recession hit, when the economy contracts, they can't pay the grocer. And if he's doing this with the majority of his customers, guess what? The grocer goes out of business. So there's a recurring theme there of people in these kinds of situations, meaning, with the debt being in the background of these scenarios. You see a lot of information about this kind of scenario, but one aspect of the scenario that isn't discussed much is that farmers, yes, there was a drop in prices, so that's called inflation, deflation. So that's deflation, and prices were going down, but just because prices are going down doesn't mean you go out of business, especially if you're producing your own product and you're doing it naturally. And if you're running a tight ship and you're running a very lean enterprise, right? Now, that's the key there, because a lot of businesses aren't really lean, as I've talked about in other videos. Lots of businesses are in debt. Debt's a killer. There's no such thing as, you hear this terminology called responsible debt. There's no such thing as responsible debt. Debt is debt. All you can do is manage debt. Debt is like risk. It is risk. And all you can do with risk is manage it and try to minimize it. But it's as long as you're engaging in risk taking, such as what debt is, there always is that risk there. You're not eliminating, in other words, the risk, in other words. So there was the stock market crash, and then the domino effect was the bank runs. There were just thousands of banks that failed, and there were bank runs. People decided, oh my gosh, all these people losing this money in the stock market. I better grab my money because I don't want to invest it in the stock market. So anyway, there was bank runs. Now, this has played out more than once. This is a recurring theme that happens over and over, and that's why we're tying it in with this discussion of, is this going to play out as a Great Depression? Because there's a lot of stock market, people going on, as I've already just discussed. We've already had a huge drop in the stock market, and this, for all we know, this could be a dead cat bounce depending on what happens from here on out. So, the bank runs were a problem because people pulled their money out. In other words, long story short, the whole economy sort of imploded. And there was this period because people first started out losing all their money in the stock market, and then people got super conservative, pulled their money out of the bank, didn't trust anything, and then they stopped buying because they didn't have any money, and then industry kind of everything went downhill for a while. The thing is that I have a personal experience with depression, and I do call it a depression because the Pacific Northwest in 1981 suffered a lot more than the rest of the nation of the USA in the 1981 recession. They suffered a lot more because they were very dependent on logging, and their logging crashed because the government saw inflation getting out of hand, in the 70s. And so they spiked up interest rates, and of course, you know what that does to housing. The housing market collapsed. The logging industry collapsed, and I was right in the middle of that. And I'm telling you that the lines, it was like I was only 18, so I didn't know any of this stuff back then, but looking at pictures of the lines in the Great Depression, it was similar in the Pacific Northwest, where when I went to look for a job back then, I only had a couple of jobs out of high school. After that, I totally just changed my life and did something just independent. And that's a different video though. But so the lines, you would go apply for a job, and this would be like a big building, like a big bank building, and there was a huge line from the desk all the way to the door, and then outside of the door there was another huge line, and this was everywhere. It didn't matter where you went to apply for a job, they were all like this. And the Pacific Northwest had a 10% unemployment compared to, I don't know, 7 or 8%, whatever it was, and it might have gone even higher than that. Now, similarly, to describe that, there are regional areas in the United States that go through similar crashes. For example, when oil crashed in 1987, the price of oil went all the way down to like $7 or something like that. The whole oil industry over there in Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, the country hadn't really recuperated yet from the 1981-1982 recession. So you had a double whammy that's regional. So in other words, you've got a national recession going on, and then you've got a localized crash going on, and that causes things to be a lot deeper than most other people throughout the nation might be feeling. And so that's why I mentioned that. So, it was, you know what, back then in the 80s, in 87 and 88, you could buy a nice home on 20 acres in Louisiana for $22,000. All right, yeah, so there was, just as today, there was a lot of speculation going on in the stock market, and everybody was piling into it. And it's not the only thing that caused the recession or depression back then to just keep going. The domino effect is really important to pay attention to, because you just don't have a concept of within the space of a time frame that other things can happen. If a thunderstorm lasts for 2 or 3 days, the possibility of a tornado is a lot higher. So if a recession is prolonged, then other things could happen. Like, for example, a big, huge drought came around, and it was called the Dust Bowl. After a few years of depression, this huge drought came around, and it just really hit the farmers really, really hard back then. And so there are things like that are in the works also today. So any of those things could happen. I'll make another video about it, but there's the potential for other circumstances, other domino effect issues that are on a grand scale, could easily cause, just what would normally be just a normal recession to go much, much deeper and turn into, a depression. The thing that is not also talked about a lot is you see a lot of these pictures of soup lines, because people in the cities, you're dependent on one source for your income, and when unemployment's 25% and you get laid off, nobody could find a job. So that's when the government swooped in as a savior, FDR, and came in, and to a lot of people he was a savior. Because he did things to help people like that in cities that were devastated. But remember that I said earlier that people that were out in the country that were self-sufficient and were not in debt and ran a lean ship, a tight ship, were not having these problems. So that brings us to the 7 ways to make ourselves depression-proof, or at the very least, depression-resistant. How watches say water resistant instead of proof. So that's better than nothing. So I'm going to give you 7 ways to do that, and it entails learning, or be sure that you can, just spend some time acquiring certain skills that are the type of skills that, as a society, as a culture, a lot of people have kind of swept under the rug and forgotten about. A lot of people in the States especially, there's so many people that they just go out to eat all the time, but now the restaurants are shut. So now what? Don't underestimate these. Learning how to cook, number 1. This is amazing. I love to cook. You know why? Because I love to eat. The second thing is how to store food and produce food. Like gardening, and how to store it. Storing food, producing food, and along with that goes also producing your own seeds. A lot of people can't even buy their own seeds. They're being told, no, you can't buy these seeds. And you can start slowly and do a little bit at a time. But when a pandemic comes around the corner like this, this is an unseen thunderstorm. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, now what? Now you're like a deer caught in headlights. And by the way, I'm not just giving you this list out of nowhere. These are all things that we practiced and did, throughout our lives, and we are still doing. We still do, because it's part of the fire lifestyle to have that self-sufficiency and do-it-yourself aspect, which the American culture has turned their back on. But that's a different subject. Let's keep moving. How to sew for mending and repairing things. I've done things years ago in the States, like repair a couch, clean a rug, just being able to maintain things, fix them, glue them back together, paint them, make them look brand new. That's a skill that gets better and better as you keep practicing it and you keep doing it. It's amazing what you can accomplish if you just do it. On the fixing thing, number 4, how to fix cars. And I'm not talking about doing an engine rebuild here. I'm just talking about, hey, understand what keeps that car starting every morning, so you don't wake up and it doesn't start. It's simple, like battery cables and batteries and alternators. How to fix houses. I'm not talking about building whole houses yourself, just unless you want to. But simple maintenance things like, how to paint houses, how to keep the trim in good shape, how to, put some small tile jobs and things like that. I did jobs like that to my house and made my house absolutely amazing with totally beautiful new Mediterranean kitchen counters and a totally redone bathroom that was just amazing. And it cost me a cent. But that's part of my spend like a millionaire program. But how to have and keep clean water. I did things like I had a 40-foot pool, and in the hot 100-degree summer, the water would evaporate, and your water bill, if you keep filling it that way, it's going to go way up. So I just put like a 8-foot. I extended my rain gutter, and people would come over and kind of look at it like, interesting. One guy said, "Does that work?" Yes, absolutely, it worked. Every time we had rains, the pool got topped off all the way to the top. Never had to use the hose. Then I'd take a pump the water into barrels, because the chlorine was diminished because the rainwater was added to the pool. And so I let it sit in the barrels until summer, and that's what I would use to water my garden during a drought, because we used to get 8-week droughts, in the South. And everything would die unless you want to sit there and just put a couple extra $100 on your water bill, which defeats the purpose in a way. And I had extra water sitting there, and my plants, we had a drought. Everybody had a drought, but my garden was just flourishing. Just to tell you, I've been there and done all these things. And and going forward, if there's issues with utility companies, how to have clean water, things like filtering water, cleaning water. And here's a really, really good skill, something else to think about. You don't see a lot of these, you see all over the place, but learn to make something out of nothing, and then barter. Having an attitude of making something out of nothing, and couple that with barter. Let me tell you a brief example. Reading some stories about the Great Depression, people had no money. But you had, for example, this person that worked on a farm, or I don't know if he just worked on it or owned it, but a long story short, he had access to lots of food. He had lots of different food varieties that they grew, vegetables, chickens, eggs, meat, and then, but they didn't have money for clothes. Back then, clothes were not mass produced, and so they were expensive. A lot of developing countries are like that. And so the clothing is produced locally and it's expensive. So this family had lots of food, but they didn't have money for clothing. And then there's a story of a woman that was extremely resourceful, separate woman, in knowing how to go to fabric manufacturers and get remnants for nothing. And so because she was resourceful in that way, she had lots of clothes for her family. So she had an abundance of clothes. So this first family had an abundance of food, but no clothes. The second family had an abundance of clothes, but maybe not as much food. So that's where the barter comes in. These two should get together and say, hey, how about some food for some clothes? Bingo! And yes, I engaged in barter during a time in the United States and North America when most people just don't give any thoughts whatsoever to barter. It's something that people hear and just kind of let it just roll off, and it's something survivalists and gloom and doomers do. But no, I was doing barter every single month. Barter here, barter there. And there's really good reasons to do it, and especially to achieve your fire lifestyle sooner and better, which is what we like to say on this channel. So those are the 7 things. I hope you enjoyed it. Do write them down, take them to heart. If you liked the video, you know what to do. Let us know in the comments. I'd love to talk to you about this. If you have any input on this, I'll be happy to answer your comments. All right, so thanks for coming to our channel, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a nice day.